Victoria 3 has a problem with one particular mechanic, the government-run ownership method. In case you're not aware, ownership methods are the blue little boxes you can change on buildings and correspond to who receives dividends from a business. Most commonly, capitalists and aristocrats make money from the profits of a business, and if you're a council republic, then the workers themselves make those profits. This is all fine, in the sense that capitalists, aristocrats, shopkeepers, and workers have reasonable upsides and downsides to them. There is, however, one particular ownership method which needs to be examined: government run. A government-run business gets bureaucrats as their owners. That's all. There's a lot of misinformation out there that people have been spreading, saying something like government-run ownership makes profits go to the government budget, or that bureaucrats pay into the investment pool, or other garbage. None of this is true. Bureaucrats take dividends from the profits, and that's all they do. This is widely understood to be a pretty garbage way of handling government-run businesses, but the often proposed fixes would ruin the balance of the game. If government-run businesses gave their profits to the government budget, then suddenly it would absolutely destroy the viability of any other system. Solutions like making bureaucrats contribute to the investment pool doesn't make any sense from understanding what a bureaucrat is. There are a few other solutions, but these are the big two that I've seen. Let's talk about some solutions to this problem. I have two ways in mind, one of which is a pretty big overhaul, and the other is a more subtle change. I'm going to start with the overhaul and then discuss the smaller, subtler change. Overhauling the ownership method mechanics is something which I think could help the government-owned method stand on its own two legs. I'd like to see ownership methods determine the future of business, in the sense that the production methods should be controlled by the owners. One complaint I've seen with Victoria 3 is that every economic system in the game is, effectively, a command economy. This isn't quite the case, since command economies determine more than just the way goods are produced, but let's roll with it for simplicity's sake. Essentially, the player can control every aspect of a business, even if that business is privately owned. It is implicit that the player is an avatar of the government, and therefore the government is controlling a private organization. How about we abolish that and remove the player's ability to control production methods, but we do allow the player to control ownership methods? Consider that the government can appropriate land. Add in a new law about land appropriation. There are three levels: no appropriation, compensation, and appropriation. What this would mean is that private businesses either have to be bought out by the government or seized by force. If the government has appropriation as their law, then capitalists contribute half as much investment pool, and with no appropriation, they contribute 50% more to the investment pool. With compensation, it's balanced. If a business is appropriated, then the owners become bureaucrats, and whatever interest group that the majority of owners subscribe to would take a negative to approval based on the size of the business. This would mean that the government-run ownership method wouldn't be locked behind command economy anymore. So what's the point of command economy then? It would provide the same authority and tax capacity bonus, and also immediately appropriate any businesses if the law is passed, changing them all to government-owned. From there, bureaucrats would run the businesses, and you, the player, would be allowed to change every method freely. Obviously, this would require a sister system to determine how different ownership methods affect decision-making about production methods. That particular sister system wouldn't have to be too complex, since you could just have different pops prioritize different things in their business. For example, capitalist owners might prioritize profitability above anything, and therefore only use newer production methods if it results in greater profits, which isn't always the case. Shopkeeper owners, who are often part of the petite bourgeoisie, might only hire non-discriminated pops, or refuse to use new production methods which they believe would encourage immigration or something. Maybe worker cooperative production methods would never choose to use production methods that automate work, thus robbing workers of jobs, unless there were genuine labor shortages, even if those automated systems would be more profitable. Basically, although economics is a study of systems which are based on statistics and numbers and all that, we as humans simply can't avoid our own ideological biases from getting in the way. This would be the negative of private ownership, the ideological influence of the owners on production. Perhaps, instead of just becoming insurrectionary, an angry interest group could have all the businesses owned by supporters of it simply refuse to operate or something like that. Point is that we can add in all sorts of new stuff, but the basic premise of this mechanic is making ownership more important. Rather than having every business effectively state-run, make that something which has to be explicitly seized from private citizens, and then balance such a mechanic with downsides and upsides based on what would keep the game relatively fair. Obviously, with no changes at all, it might not be so balanced, but balance isn't always too easy to make happen, so my prescription would be to tweak stuff until it feels right. Let's talk a little bit about the other solution. This way of solving the command economy is much smaller, but maybe less a balanced approach. I want to focus in on the effects of command economy itself and the government-owned ownership method. Let's keep the game's current systems mostly in place. When the player changes to command economy, bureaucrats take over as normal. They take the dividends, like normal. They do not, however, take all the dividends. Instead, as the player, I get to spend bureaucracy to take a portion of the profits for my budget. I'm not sure what the exact numbers should be, But how about something like 1 bureaucracy point per percentage of profits and building size? That would mean to take 1% of the profits for the budget from a size 50 textile mill, it would cost 50 bureaucracy points. Obviously, this bureaucracy number would need to be adjusted and changed to suit game balance, so I'm not sure what the formula should be, but in essence, trade bureaucracy for profits from government-run businesses. Simultaneously, even if I take 0% of the profits, I also get to choose the wages of the workers in a business. Optimally, I like to see some kind of text box where I literally type in the base wage of that building, but I know Paradox kind of hates sliders these days and prefers incremental buttons. So we could split it into paying quarter base wage, half base wage, double base wage, and quadruple base wage or something. Again, the increments of the wage buttons can be determined by some effort on balancing, but the concept is what I'm going after here. The last piece for government bureaucracy would be the ability to determine where goods are sold. I have in mind 3 particular things you could do: export exclusive production, normal production, or domestic exclusive production. You could have a huge swath of textiles which produce clothes for the people, and then a sector of textile mills that operate differently and which only export their clothes. This way you could sort of segregate your industries away from vulturous foreigners, or perhaps starve your people and just trade everything away for big tariffs. It's up to you, of course. Essentially, you as the player use government-run businesses to exert control over the minutiae of your businesses. I think this would make the command economy reform actually something different and interesting from the other types, and would do a great job of simulating that sense of really interfering with the economy, which the game currently lacks. Being able to cut out the capitalist or trade unionist middleman to just decide my wages and who my good gets sold to would be awesome. The downside, of course, is no capitalist means no investment pool, but you get to spend bureaucracy on claiming profits from your businesses. I don't want this to be too overpowered, and thankfully it's relatively easy to find a balanced implementation by just adjusting those bureaucracy values such that there is a genuine cost to getting those profits. The other way to balance it, perhaps, would be to replace that bureaucracy cost with an authority cost. I'm not sure if that's such a great idea, since authority is so hard to come by, but then again, command economy does give extra authority, so it goes hand in hand. Right now, I'm leaning towards a bureaucracy cost, not an authority cost. I certainly could be convinced either way though, and would like to see what you guys think about that. In summary, command economy is a terrible law with no point in Victoria 3. It is weak compared to other economic models and doesn't make any sense with regards to the capitalistic bureaucrats who take all the money, without contributing anything to the government, despite the government owning the business. I presented 2 potential solutions. The first one is something of a revamp of the whole ownership system, and the second one is a revamp of just the command economy system. I think after some thought, I prefer the second solution, but I would throw my weight behind either one. I'm adding this addendum quickly because Paradox released on their dev diary while I was putting this video together, and it has some stuff which could be relevant to this video. In the next update, Pops will be able to construct buildings independently of the government using funds from the investment pool. I'm assuming, because nothing to the contrary has been said, that these privately built buildings will still allow the government to decide their methods. To me, this change to the game is erroneous at best and addresses none of the real problems. I may be speaking too early, since it's fair to say that there could be more to the system that hasn't been revealed yet. To me, this change is like a tiptoe in the right direction. More autonomous construction by the private sector is good, but it's only barely any sort of fix for the game's lack of depth or historicity with regards to the private sector. I think a change to the proposed system in the most recent dev diary is to make those privately constructed buildings be off limits to the player. Those buildings should be truly privately run, and the investment pool ought to be split between the government and the private sector depending on the economic system of the nation. With laissez-faire, something like 75% of the investment pool should be for private investment only. With interventionism, I'd say a nice 50-50 split, and for agrarianism, I'd say 25% for the private sector. Obviously, traditionalism still would have no real investment pool. Okay, that's the addendum, and my opinions on the investment pool system. To summarize, it's an inch towards something good, but not nearly enough. To me, Victoria 3 is lacking a lot of depth in particularly zoomed-in issues like these. In general, I really like this game, which is why I make so many videos on it. I'm not sure what direction Paradox wants to take this game, but to me, the game has been built to be a pretty in-depth economic simulator, which to me indicates that they ought to focus on depth in particular fields. I'd happily pay for a DLC that adds functionality like what I've discussed here into the game, although I'd want a little more than just the command economy revamp for a whole DLC. You take my point though, I hope. Let me know your opinions about the direction of DLC for Victoria 3, since I know I'm just one person and my opinions may not necessarily be the consensus. I know war is a really contentious aspect of Victoria 3, which I hope to see changed, but man, I really hope Paradox doesn't end up ignoring the depth that these economic systems need to really flourish. I also want to make it clear that I know how tough development is, and I always encourage patience with Paradox in all my critique style videos. You'll never get anywhere being angry at Paradox. Instead, it's important that we be reasonable with expectations and understand that Paradox has stockholders to report to. That means development time spent on things like new mechanics and revamps most likely ought to be paid for. I hope you enjoyed this mini critique of Victoria 3's command economy system, and if you want to contribute to the conversation, you can comment here or join my Discord and talk with me and the other community members there. Thank you for your time.